Advanced Residential Applications and Case Studies. Chapter 1, Introduction to Advanced Applications. Page 10. Ownership interests can make a property complex. Consider a typical home in a tract development in the area where you live. A cookie cutter house. Appraising such a property, once you get up to speed as an appraiser, should be a piece of cake, right? Well, not necessarily. After all, the appraisal process goes well beyond consideration of the design and type of construction, conformity, and environmental issues, doesn't it? Of course it does. At its essence, the appraisal process is actually about the value of the rights inherent in the ownership of a piece of real estate. Therefore, the typical cookie cutter house in your neighborhood may turn into an advanced assignment when you find out that the property is complex because the ownership rights being appraised are not fee simple. A fee simple estate, that's highlighted, is defined as absolute ownership unencumbered by any other interest or estate, subject only to the limitations imposed by the governmental powers of taxation, eminent domain, police power, and escheat. Fee simple is the most common type of ownership interest appraised in residential appraisal. Alas, not every appraisal involves the appraisal of the fee simple estate. Instead, for instance, there may be a life interest or a life estate per autre v, which means for the life of another, which is a life estate based on the life of a person other than the one holding title. A life estate, that's highlighted, is defined as rights of use, occupancy, and control limited to the lifetime of a designated party, sometimes referred to as the life tenant. What is the market value of the ownership rights of this otherwise typical home? Given the fact that when Aunt Sally dies, title to the property will no longer be held by the current owner, but instead will transfer to cousin Jimmy. And by the way, Aunt Sally isn't doing too well. What would the typical seller and buyer make of all of this? That, after all, is what market value is. Interpreting the actions of typical buyers and sellers in a defined set of market circumstances. As an appraiser, you are actually valuing the rights inherent in the ownership of the real estate. Never mind the typical design and construction of the house in the above example. The very essence of the property you are appraising, the ownership rights, is almost certainly radically different from every other similar house in the neighborhood. This appraisal of a typical looking house just became an advanced assignment, but not because the property looked unusual or out of place, but because the ownership interest is different from other similar homes in the neighborhood. And speaking of ownership interests, there are other interests besides fee simple or life estate that you may encounter. Valuing these other interests, for instance, leased fee or leasehold, may also make the property complex and might make for an advanced appraisal assignment. Leased fee interest, that's highlighted, is defined as the ownership interest held by the lessor, which includes the right to receive the contract rent specified in the lease, plus the revisionary right when the lease expires. Depending on the circumstances, a leased fee estate may have a significantly different value than a fee simple estate. We will look at a couple of examples later on in the course. Leasehold estate, that's highlighted, is defined as the right held by the lessee to use and occupy real estate for a stated term and under the conditions specified in the lease. Even though the tenant does not hold title to the property, there may be value to the tenant's interest in the property during the term of the lease. Other ownership interests you may encounter are undivided interests, such as joint tenancy or tenancy in common. The appraisal of properties owned under these circumstances may also qualify as assignments requiring advanced appraisal methods and techniques. End of page.